El verbo frasal, bring up, en el tiempo pasado es brought up. Hoy lo veremos con todos los pronombres.
Yeah. And so obviously it seems to the people further on this idea, and I brought up a tweet that I had seen doing the rounds on Twitter that basically said that the Oxford
dealing with the mafia. Every time I brought up the mafia, the conversation would stop.
Yep. You know, when I was, I brought up that slide of Vinod Khosla.
When I brought up these fossils, some argued that perhaps the lake had dried up. Used here in Ontario, such as the ones I brought up on the last show.
On kilowatts, or the amount of energy, like I brought up the fungibility and the storability and the transport.
What I brought up before about market saturation, like
say, look at the coal I brought up and
so I brought up this idea, what if we could just use
dramatic story, which at that point in the cellar, and during that conversation you brought up the mimetic story, which at that.
And I don't know about you, but weren't you brought up to be sugar and spice and everything nice?
Possible. You brought up the story of
one subject, since you brought up other committees. One thing, since you brought up the Judiciary Committee and what they're working. Sure. Well, you brought up the university system.
Mike, to you.
I will. But I'm glad that you brought up something like the minimum wage.
So let's stay on this topic for a moment, which I'm glad you brought up. As you know better than I do.
Drive, right? Exactly. And I'm glad you brought up the car analogy, because if you look at what we've done with
and given Frozen, you brought up Frozen and Let It Go.
As you brought up, I believe it's the
allocators. One example that you brought up
as you brought up, Sylvia, many of the different topics that we will cover in this show. But
the screening for them.
So that you brought up BRCA1, that's okay. So I was going that when you brought up sunburn, if you had a couple
attacked again, they brought up some and German alike. Before they attacked again, they brought up some trench mortars and knocked 7 bells out of us. Then
on exchanging fire with the Germans until they brought up a battery.
And they brought up the X-rays,
all kind of very early associations.
Another point that they brought up was that often in real life you have a sort of ambivalence towards somebody else.
At one point, they brought up your good friend and alleged.
They brought up a good point, and that is
90s, and in 2004 they brought again APHIS and other
at Kennedy Space Center, and they brought up the fact that during the Apollo program
that did pass. It's well, since we brought up buildings, I'll have to ask, because you did carry the bill.
And one of the exciting things from the last core we brought up is we
brought up. And
no, it hasn't. It hasn't, and it hasn't been finished.
Is there anything you'd like to ask about any of the specifics we brought up about the future of
related one? So since we brought up empathy, so probably you the same. One of the things I get asked all the time by entrepreneurs.
We brought up cadaver dogs, and we worked this area for a long time.
a lot of you were upset that we brought up Edison, but didn't even talk about Nikola Tesla.
To be open so we can see what specimens we brought up.
Public service, just we brought up a big sound system from Port-au-Prince, and we opened for RAM actually.
After there's been a death. And what they found out, we brought up our experts and Mike sat them down and said.
And that was based upon a philosophy that we brought up a long time ago.